India win. He'll come back for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India home. Lords goes wild.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of 81 All Out podcast. This episode, in the lead up to the India Tour of West Indies, we're going to look back at the 97 India Tour of West Indies. To discuss that and more, I've got a couple of guests with me today. Krishna, a prominent banker from London and a cricket fan. Hi, Krishna.
Hi.
And our fellow 81 All Out crew member, Sidhu, is also here. Hi, Sidhu.
Hey, Mahesh. Good to be here.
Given we're going to be talking about a series which is very close to our hearts, let's spend a couple of minutes on a bit of an indulgence. So when we started this, initially this started as a blog, which eventually became a podcast. So when we started as a blog, the first suggestion that Sidhu came back with for the name was 81 All Out, which sounded perfect for a suicidal mission at that point in time. But I never asked him why, so I'm going to use this opportunity to ask him why he came up with that choice so instinctively.
There was no particular reason, actually. I didn't even think twice about why and how it would work out. I think we were discussing names and you had probably come up with something on the email. I said, I've always liked a score being, the name of a website or the name of a magazine. I remember even back when I was part of the editorial team that put together the Cricket Monthly, Cricinfo's digital long form website, I had suggested a few such scores. I hadn't suggested 81 All Out because that didn't somehow strike me then, but I had suggested some kind of a score to name that entity, because I thought, a score in cricket and even in other sports, but so much so in cricket, brings so much memories to people, and hundreds of memories gush forth, if you just mention like 333 or anything, of course, the famous 99.94. So 81 All Out, I thought, now that I think about it, I didn't think of then, as I said, but now that I think about it, I think it sort of captures a lot of the heartbreak that you went through while watching Indian cricket in the 90s, and it was probably a perfect encapsulation. So the perfect heartbreak. So there were many, but this one, in Barbados, which is like the West Indian fortress, and a chance to win a test and maybe even win a series for the first time in however long. You have 120 to chase in the final innings, and what gets more crushing than that?
You wrote a long form piece on the Chennai 99 test and you come out of the 81 All Out for a blog name. What is your fascination with this cricket pain?
Well, because I think we remember pain and hold on to pain much more than we do with joy. Of course, there is Calcutta 2001 and so many other moments of joy. But, if I were to just sit down and think about cricketing memories, it's always these painful memories that come first. And of course, they've softened over time, but they're still quite stark. And I think it's true of life as well. You remember the pain much more than the joy. I guess I'm getting older, but I think as you get older, that holds true.
Guys, both of you, right? The first time when Mahesh sort of asked the question, the thought of is, you guys sort of followed a lot of the cricket in the 90s, much more than I, because I wasn't in India then, and it was sort of Cricinfo was coming in. But I think this represents, really the wound of the 90s, right? Because, in a way, it was just after the peak of the West Indian side, but still, there were a handful of great players in that side. And a little bit like India never having won in Australia, this is the one chance to have done it, right? And I actually, even more than the Madras Test in '99, I think this is a much bigger scar. That one, India's beaten Pakistan. I think it was a good test match. There was a nice story about Pakistan winning in Chennai, etc. But this one was a once in a lifetime chance, so to say.
I think we'll get to Barbados a little later, because that's going to be pretty much the chunk of this podcast. Yeah, at 81 All Out, we're always fascinated with how cricketing memories are formed, how they are retained, and how fans' experience of watching the game over their life stages change, which is also one of the reasons why we try and get people of slightly different age groups to talk about the same series. Let's get started with a little bit of a personal experience. Krishna, what was your experience like watching the series? Where were you? What were you doing in life at that time?
I was finishing up my graduate program at NYU at that time. I graduated in June '99, so a few months. The series was a few months before that, and so there wasn't any TV in the US. Later on, you end up watching a bit of the YouTube, but most of it was from reports and a bit of radio actually, and actually calling India and talking to your parents, right? So that was sort of how you got it, along with some basic reports and scorecards. Cricinfo was in its infancy, if I remember right, those days. So that was the memory. And one other thing is actually before the series started, um, three people who were covering that series actually visited New York on the way to the West Indies, which was Mohan, Vijay Lokpalli, and B.V. Krishnan, who were covering the series for the Hindu at that time. And they spent a weekend in New York just before. And I still remember actually going with V.V. Krishnan to a specialist film store to buy a bunch of films for him to take to the West Indies. Those days were the digital camera days, so you had to buy physical film and along with a bunch of other things. I still remember lugging it on the tube along with him, back to his hotel. And actually, the news of Srinath's injury and pulling out came that weekend when they were in New York, when it broke that he was going to miss the tour.
And the legendary replacement Noel David came in.
Noel who, as
Noel.
apparently Sachin asked when he was told about the replacement.
So you didn't really watch any of the matches live?
No, I the only time I went was for the couple of one days in Port of Spain, which was just after the Test series. This was the first 2 one days, but did not watch any of the Tests live. So the memories are a lot more from other sources, which you pick up anecdotes and other things, but wasn't from a first-hand watching experience. Was it telecast live in India then? It was, right?
Yeah, it was.
In fact, it was the first time India's tour to West Indies was telecast, I think, live. I don't think the 89 series was live. I remember seeing highlights on Doordarshan. Yeah. Every night there used to be highlights. And of course, it used to be, the quality was not that great. You had grainy footage most of the time. And, you suddenly had Ambrose or someone bowling a bouncer, and then the screen would just totally go haywire, and then the next thing you know, that some batsman would have edged the ball to the slips, and you see Carl Hooper celebrating and all that. So it was totally different then. But this is the first time that an Indian tour to the West Indies was telecast. It was probably Prime Sports then, or maybe it had changed to Star Sports, ESPN. And it was great footage, and it was great to watch, especially with the time zones, and just to get live a feel of cricket in the Caribbean. I mean, of course, there were other series before that had shown us that, Australia series, the West Indies and all that. But, actually watching India play there was quite fun. I mean, I was in school in the final year, actually, 10th standard board exams coming up. So this was like a pretty crucial time in my schooling thing. And I ended up watching so much of those games late into the night. And again, I can't say I watched everything. I mean, there were obviously phases that I missed, and you often end up waking up at odd hours just to switch on the TV, put it on mute, and just to see the score, or you put it on really low. And they were definitely waking up in the morning not knowing the score, because the newspaper obviously carries it only till lunch, or maybe sometimes till tea, and you don't know the end of play, so you try and figure it out. You're either sometimes there used to be highlights in the morning, so you try and watch that, or you figure out a way. You probably get it. Sometimes it used to come on radio too, so in the morning radio news they used to announce the score. So yeah, I mean, the memories again are all, obviously a lot of it is formed after that from reading and talking to people and reading, and even from books. But still, whatever little bit I watched, I remember quite vividly.
Sidhu, actually, the '83 tour of West Indies was a bit similar to me. There was no TV in those days, but it was actually listening to radio with the the volume low and under your pillow, right, at night, because that this was the '83, just before the World Cup, the Test series that India went.
Yeah, that must have been something. I mean, I never had that experience. I mean, I wasn't. I mean, I used to listen to cricket on radio, but I don't know about the '97, and I didn't really do that. I didn't really follow it on radio as much as on TV, because whenever I needed to, I could just wake up, go and switch it on, and just check the score.
Yeah, in a way, my experience was very similar to Sidhu in the sense that probably slightly younger, but maybe not 10th class. Maybe attention was a little more, so I could afford to stay awake through the night and somehow just wake up in time to go to school. The only thing that I'm struggling to kind of recollect sometimes is that I don't remember too much of the commentary around these matches. Like, for instance, the South Africa series before, there are distinct passages of play where I remember the commentary quite well surrounding cricket. But here, I seem to have watched most of the cricket in mute for some reason. I mean, not for some reason, for very good reason, because others are sleeping.
Also, I think the South Africa series, there was they used to have these wicket packages and highlight packages that they used to keep playing, at least in my memory, over and over and over again. So many times that, there were there's Trevor Cook commentary or Robin Jackman's commentary. Some lines are still stuck in my head. When Azhar, I remember, came down the track and hit a 6. And I think it was Robin Jackman who said, that you were fully expecting and it's maximum. And all these years later, it's still stuck in my head. And the same thing with Mohinder Amarnath, of course, who was there that time, when Srinath got Pollock. And there was so even, I think Charu Sharma was there in that series. And there was a couple of things I remember of his. But in the West Indies series, either they didn't repeat the highlights so much, or the commentary wasn't really it was different. I mean, I remember moments when Cozier spoke about Roland Holder. Roland Holder was that time had a relatively good series. He had a couple of good knocks, and they were talking about him as a prospective captain of the West Indies, because he was really famous as a captain of Barbados. And I remember when Hooper, few things that Cozier said about Hooper, but yeah, not as much as the South Africa series at all.
And also, I think cricket from the West Indies, right? You hardly got any telecast, those days, and this was probably the '89, as you say. There was a few things, but given the domination of the West Indies, and having played half the cricket at home, which we in India never got to see really, I think there's a bit of a mystique about the whole thing, right? Compared to South Africa or Australia, where we ended up watching a lot more in India.
Yeah, maybe, but maybe also the timings, purely like your attention is more on the visual than on the audio at that time. I mean, unless you're listening on radio, but on TV, I think most of the time you wake up late in the night and it's just sort of mute and let's see what's happening kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the time zone also matters, right? Even though, I mean, '89 is probably the last India series, but in between we've seen other teams going there. And I remember watching the Australia series, for instance. But you don't really stay through the night to watch the entire match as you do with an India match. So it's still not a complete experience when you're watching cricket in West Indies. I guess this was probably the first one where you get a sense of the whole day's play, how it pans out and how the atmosphere is and stuff like that. I also want to talk a little bit about the scale of the series, the 5-test series. Of course, it didn't pan out that way given so many rain interruptions and stuff like that. So we didn't really get a full sense of the scale. But going into the series, did you sense that you were in some sort of a new territory? Because, I mean, of course, we had the India tour of Australia in '92 before. But before that, I think the last 5 test series before that was probably Pakistan and India in '87. So for me, it was the Australia series when I was very young, and this was the first 5 test series which I was watching fully aware of what's happening in the series. Was it something similar for you as well, Sidhu?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, at that time, I remember there was a lot of talk around too much cricket. And that was around the time, 96, 97 was around the time when India was playing day in and day out. I mean, they hadn't had too many away series between 92 and 96. But the moment 96 started, once the World Cup, then you go to England. And then, there were all these one-day series like in Singapore, and then the Sahara Cup started. Then they come back. They had a series in at home against South Africa, away in South Africa. So I remember a lot of people write a lot of newspaper reports about how there was a lot of cricket, and in fact, Srinath's injury was blamed on that, and how Sachin had to really rely overly on Srinath and Prasad in South Africa, and invariably, I mean, even David Johnson and Ganesh, who were picked, hardly bowled that much, and so Srinath took the bulk of the load. In fact, he, I think, in the final test in Johannesburg, when India came pretty close to winning, I think he was basically bowled to the ground. And he bowled really well, but that sort of played a big part in him getting injured for this series. So I remember that. And yes, I also thought, why are they, I mean, how come they're playing 5 tests? But then maybe one of the reasons was that, it's so far away that it's no point going and just playing a short series there. I think because the Ashes had also been 5 tests, you felt like maybe the other series would go that way as well. But I didn't really have that many thoughts on it, as much as just reading about too much cricket and people criticizing, in fact, that India playing so much.
A lot of my cricket watching was in the 80s, where 5 and even 6 test series were a lot more common, both in India but elsewhere as well. And so obviously things had dropped off by then. I think for you guys the 5 test was more novel. For me, it was almost you took a break from it, right, rather than the other way around.
You must have watched a 6 test series too, right? Did you?
Yeah. 81, 82 India, plus the Lloyd series in 83 was also in India, was a 6.
Mm-hmm.
So those
in fact,
tests,
Gavaskar got his 236 in the 6th test, right?
Yeah, the Madras, the 0 for 2 when he came in at number 4.
Yeah, and that was the 6th test of the series.
Yeah, that is the 6th, and that series was the 5 traditional venues plus Ahmedabad hosted the 3rd test, 3rd or 4th, I think 3rd if I remember right. So that 83 was Kanpur was there. Bangalore wasn't not yet a mainstream test era in those days. Kanpur was much more one of the 6. And Ahmedabad actually hosted the 83.
Shots fired. Sidhu, do you have anything to say about it?
Absolutely not.
But how does, I mean, just out of curiosity, how does following a 6 test series feel like it?
The 81-82 Keith Fletcher's team was probably one of the most boring series you'll ever see. Because I think India won the first test in Bombay, where Madan Lal and Kapil got 5 in the second innings. And then basically Gavaskar played for 5 draws. And England, probably of that era, you had Chris Tavare and you had Boycott and Tavare actually for the first 4 tests till Boycott went back from Calcutta to the Rebel Tour. And so you can imagine how that series would have been. And I still remember the Madras test where Gooch made 100. So India batted for a day and a half. Vishwanath made that 222. And the evening of the 3rd day, Gavaskar came on to bowl a few overs.
Yeah, I mean, talking about boring series, the series we're talking about could also be termed an extremely boring series. I mean, apart from that one test, the other 4 tests had a attritional quality about them. And of course, 2 of them, the last 2 were heavily affected by rain. And the first one was also, I mean, the first 2 also had bits of rain, but just the quality of the cricket and the pace of the scoring. I mean, there were days when India would score like 190 in the whole day, and or West Indies would plod along. I mean, even batsmen of Hooper, Sachin, ended up having to grind rather than just play their free-flowing game.
Yeah, the wickets were quite slow, right? At least for the first 2 tests, they were really, really slow and not coming onto the bat, and then they were struggling to time the ball. I mean, even the Sidhu double 100, for instance, was not really a fluent innings. I mean, even pretty late in his innings, you're struggling to accelerate. And
some 600 plus minutes, man, like 10 hours or 11 hours or something he batted for that.
Yeah.
But also, even in that test, though, India never really felt like even going for a win, right? Even after that.
No, I mean, they were trying to, I think, bat the West Indies out of the game, but the scoring was so slow that it could never end up being possible. And I think Sidhu did get criticism for that. I mean, I remember even in the Hindu, if I remember right, there was people were saying, yes, a double 100, sure, And Sidhu, in fact, Sidhu had scored a terrific 100 on the 89 tour in Kingston, and this was his comeback of sorts after he fumed out of England. And of course, he also at that time had a lot of thing going on with that case of his, that legal case. He was appearing in court and all that, and so this was like a big comeback for him. So people were appreciating it, but there was also criticism of, hey, this is also about winning a match. It's not just about yourself. So I remember that.
Hey, is that a bit of Sachin's captaincy that you guys remember from that era, or do you think it's generally not a safety first attitude alone, and there's more to it?
I don't think it's got to do with Sachin's captaincy, because this is peculiar to this series where the quality of pitches was so bad that pretty much everybody except Lara was batting at like 40-45 strike rate. I mean, even Sachin, that 88 that he scored where he gets run out by Walsh at mid-off, I like in my memory it still plays out as a great innings. And I was looking at it, the strike rate was less than 40. And that is an innings that I remember fondly, which, like, there are other innings in that series that you don't even remember fondly. I think it's got a lot more to do with the pitches than I guess, attritional captaincy strategy.
And also, that was around the time when pitches were changing. I mean, the Australia tour in '95, when Australia won, the pitches were not this slow and not this, didn't demand such attritional cricket. In fact, the faster bowlers ended up getting quite a good assistance. I mean, the Rifle, Fleming, even the West Indians, they all, I think West Indies, that test they won, Ambrose had a great test. But then I think there was a New Zealand series after that. And then India. So I think those were around the times when the West Indian pitches were just like completely transforming. And of course, they went on to play like that for many years. But even in like, the final test in Guyana, I mean, which was largely rained out, but you had Chanderpaul bowling leg spin from around the wicket and bowling into that leg stump line. And India just couldn't manage to score. And not only do you have these attritional pitches, not only do you have rain, then you have a guy coming and bowling leg spin from around the wicket. I'm like, what is this? I mean, if it had happened now, I mean, there would have been death of Test cricket headlines every day.
I mean, the whole series would have played out like the perfect headline machine, right? I mean, every test, every day, you could have made this case that Test cricket is dying.
Yeah, and even apart from the Barbados, and that too maybe the final few days. I mean, even the crowds weren't that, even the grounds weren't that full. There were a lot of, the first two tests, there was a lot of empty seats, if I remember. So, yeah, it was, I think headline cricket writers today would have just written dirge after dirge.
Well, not only cricket writers, and all the armchair critics on social media as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
Imagine the fire that would have created.
But actually, fire at Babylon.
No, if you really see the pitches, right, I think Barbados clearly, we'll talk about later, but that one had life in it. But if you look at, overall, I think Jamaica, Kingston Sabina Park was the one that, really changed, right, in terms of character. As you say, this could have been or close to the inflection point of wickets in the West Indies completely, changing. Well, from the test match being called off, right, a few years before that.
Yeah, that was the England one, right? Yeah.
In fact, I remember talking about Sabina Park. I remember in 2006 when India finally went and won a series in West Indies. It was Sabina Park that ended up being the result match, and and Sabina Park, and it turned out to be quite a vicious kind of pitch, very, very difficult to bat. And same way Barbados was in '97, which was again extremely difficult to bat. And before that Jamaica test in 2006, people were saying how the glory days of Sabina Park, and how it almost used to have a glassy surface. You could see your reflection on it, and Holding and all those bowlers who used to bowl. And people were bemoaning how the pitch had changed in character. And then you suddenly get this snake of a pitch where no batsman can put bat on ball.
No, and I still remember some of the clips which you see in England still, where Sky shows it from the tours of the 80s and early 90s. where you see the gloss on the pitch where the grass is just rolled onto the pitch and they water it and keep watering it, right? Which sort of brings the shine up. It's just, you can still see it on TV when they show some of the old highlights even these days. So.
Okay, going back to this series, we'll just keep the Barbados test out of it for now. But if you can kind of think of the readily recallable images of this test series from other tests, from the other 4 tests, what are the things that you can recall now?
Yeah, for me, it was, I think, Abe Kuruvilla is a ready memory that comes to mind. I'd never seen Kuruvilla bowl. I mean, I read a lot about his Ranji Trophy exploits, and apparently in the early 90s he was really quick, and of course his pace had sort of given way by the time he was selected, but yeah, it was interesting to see him bowl. I thought he did a good job for most of the series, especially with Srinath injured. It was very tight. I mean, Prasad had a very good series as well. Prasad was that time in the middle of his purple patch. It just started Test cricket and he sort of was getting, 4 or 5 wickets along. I mean, England, South Africa, West Indies, he was just picking them all up. And he had a good time. But yeah, Kuruvilla comes to mind. Kumble, of course, had a good series. I mean, that was around the time when, Kumble was being heavily criticized for being a home track bully and not doing well abroad, especially after England and South Africa. He had not apparently done that well, but West Indies, yeah, he really did a great job through the series. Other wickets also in a way suited him, but in a way it didn't, because the turn was very slow. And in India, he was used to the ball biting the surface. I mean, Jumbo was, of course, a name that came around then. I think Mongia gave it to him, because the ball used to just take off the pitch, and but he never got that in the West Indies. But he kept it tight, Hooper and Lara went after him a few times, but overall, I think he had a good series. Spoke about Roland Holder, that innings of his sticks in mind. I think Nayan Mongia might have had
he had a good test.
Well.
He scored, I think, the second test, right, where he scores a 70 odd.
Yeah, I don't remember anything from that innings, but I remember that he had a good innings. Of course, most of the memories are from the Barbados test. I think even Dravid had it was a good series for him. Not a great series, but a good series. I mean, it was early in his career, and I was pretty keen to see how he would do facing Ambrose and Walsh, and he did mostly okay. He had a couple of a few good knocks through the series.
Actually, if you look at the West Indies team, right, of this was the first one where the first couple of years where it was sort of post Haynes, Greenwich before that, etc., where it was basically Hooper to an extent, Lara, 3 fast bowlers, right? I think the rest were all sort of, relative journeymen by the standards of that era of the West Indies that kept getting rotated around. And Chanderpaul was in his first, 3 years of cricket, right? Obviously the Barbados test was where he made his first test 100, but he was averaging, close to 50 or around 50 at that time. But if you look at the scorecards, which I did before our podcast, just to, make sure I refresh some of my memories, it's such a, obviously rain was a big factor. Slow pitches were another one, and relatively defensive cricket. But other than the Barbados test, you almost had, the average was about 2.5 to 3 innings finished per match, right?
Yeah, and in the Barbados test, they could have probably played 9 innings if they wanted.
All right, now that we are there, let's talk about the Barbados test. Does it still hurt, Sidhu?
Well, as I said, of course it does. It's sort of, the pain has probably softened over time, and it's a little bit more diffuse because there's other pain that has come in. But I think it's the stage of your life as well, right? I mean, I'm sure there's somebody for whom this World Cup semi-final hurt a lot. And, it didn't hurt as much for me. But I think the stage of your life, your expectations, your what you really hope for your team. And it's a very stark memory even now.
How about you, Krishna? Actually, I wanted to ask you this earlier as well. Did it hurt you as much? Did you feel it as intensely as the two of us are feeling, for instance?
Actually, I really didn't, right? Because 2 things. One is I wasn't in the middle of it, so to say, right? I wasn't in the West Indies, nor was in India where, you guys had a lot more of coverage in terms of TV, daily reports, etc. So I think being in New York was, away from it all was part of it. But I also think I became a lot more of a cricket neutral, like you guys have become now, and you were probably a little bit more, for supporting a team at that time. So I think I would have felt, if this was in the 80s, I would have felt a lot stronger, like I did when the 85-86 tour of Australia, where India should have won Melbourne and it was rained out, and Sydney also was after having got 600 for 4, it ended in a draw, which I think was our best chance to win in Australia, and India finally did it now. But I think I would have felt a lot more in the 80s. I think as with everything else, you mellow a bit more, right? And you become much more of a neutral. In a way, growing up, I actually supported West Indies against India even in the 80s, right? That team to me was probably the greatest team. And having grown through that era, you just can't, even if it's your own country, to me, not supporting that team or not wanting them to this thing was never the case, right? Funnily, I still remember the 83 final. When I was in 6th grade at that time. And I think I was the only person in my class who was actually supporting West Indies and actually was quite upset that they lost the match.
So you've been anti-national for a long time now.
See, it's come back into fashion now.
So, I was revisiting the YouTube clips, which I never had the courage to till we had to do this podcast, and I didn't want to come here and talk out of just pure memory. And even in that short highlights, what I realized while I was watching is that, there was very little chance that India could have chased even a score of 120 on that wicket. And now that I had the benefit of listening to commentary as well, which I don't remember much from memory, even the commentators are talking about it, saying it's going to be so hard on this wicket. And, it was, when I look back, I thought 120 and we messed up this chance and we could have won that series. But it was not as easy as it seems to be in my memory. Did you get that sense, or how was it when you were watching it, Sidhu?
Yeah, I think, the thing with that test is that it got progressively more difficult to bat. And one thing about the test we must mention is that, Azhar gets a lot of flack for his decisions at the toss for various matches. But Sachin actually won the toss in that test and he chose to field. And nobody talks about that. So, it wasn't like I wouldn't say it was a vicious pitch throughout. It was hard, and then it got harder, and then it got impossible. And I still remember 120. I still remember that ball that Franklin Rose bowled to Sidhu, which was the first wicket in that chase. And Jeff Boycott on commentary, and he was going, "How do you play that? How do you play that?" And that was just a vicious snorter, and there was no way Sidhu could have even. There's no way any batsman, I guess, could have played that one. Got the sort of just took the glove or maybe took the edge of the bat, and it just popped up for the slips. And at that moment, it was. I sort of just got that sinking feeling, and I'm like, "There's no way." And that was Franklin Rose, who was having a terrific series. But then you also had Bishop and Ambrose to bowl. Walsh was injured, so that was some small respite. Maybe he would have been all out for 50 otherwise, and this website would have been called something different. But after that, I just felt there's no way we're going to chase 120. It's anything is going to be tough on this pitch, and 120 is just too much.
Guys, one thing though, just rolling it back a bit, right? I read a couple of Mohan's reports, into the preview of the match as well as during the match. And one of the things he says is India played a 3-day game in Barbados just before the test. I couldn't find that scorecard on Cricinfo at all, but apparently Kumble was did 12th man duties for that test for that 3-day game. And there was as Mohan calls it, there was a leg spinner called David Marshall, who was a Saturday afternoon tweaker in his words, who actually seems to have got some wickets against India in that game. But more importantly, apparently during every break in that game, the groundsman had his men roll grass onto the pitch and water it continuously in the lead up to that game.
This was after the tour match was after the 2 tests, is it?
No, before the Barbados test, there was a 3-day tour match.
Yeah, after the first 2 tests, there was a 3-day tour match. I remember that, and I remember that Barbados actually packed their team with pace bowlers. I mean, they were not express pace like the heyday of West Indies, but they were bowlers who they played. I remember Hendy, Bryan, and all that. I remember those guys were, I think, playing that match. But this spinner seems to have got the wicket.
Yeah, he talks about this leg spinner called Dave Marshall when Kumble didn't play. But the part I found interesting was continuous rolling of the pitch and rolling grass into the pitch and then watering it continuously to get some shine.
No, I think after the first 2 tests, there was a lot of complaints from both the captains as well, right? I think Sachin made quite a few comments about the pitch as well, and they wanted livelier tracks. And in fact, I think there are very few YouTube videos of this series available, but one of them is also the Sachin's 90 in the first innings. And there are a couple of boundaries that he hits through the covers, and Tony Cozier on commentary says the captain has been asking for a livelier track, and he gets one, and he capitalizes on that or something to that extent. So in a sense, when the test started, like Sidhu was saying, the wicket was playing quite well, and the bounce was consistent, and it didn't like the pace at which it kind of deteriorated is what was dramatic. So when we started, it didn't look like we'll have the kind of finish that we eventually ended up having.
And also coming back to my first point, just to follow up on that rolling, I think probably the reason, looking at how green the pitch was, even if it was a little bit optical and it played best in the first sort of 2.5-3 days, I think he probably put it as a semi-defensive measure as well, right? Put West Indies in.
Possible.
And also maybe because he felt that, his bowlers had a pretty good game, even on those slow wickets in the first 2 tests. I'm talking about Prasad and Kuruvilla, and maybe he felt that, this was a good chance for them to actually use whatever is in here and get the West Indies out. And I mean, to be fair, I'm looking at the scorecard now. They got 298, West Indies. So, having put a opposition in, with 298 and with the batting lineup, I think India would have probably taken that. And they, in fact, went on to start really well in their first innings. So, it was only like halfway through the first innings that suddenly there was a bit of a collapse.
Did get 298, but they were also 193 for 7. And I think India's problem of, letting the tail wag also continued here, right? If you look at it, Chanderpaul clearly, finished 137 not out. But I think it was partly with that partnership with Courtney Brown and then more importantly with Ambrose, right? That did...
That was a problem through this series and through, of course, a lot of series in the 90s and things. I mean, this series specifically, Ambrose was like, Ambrose is the sort of guy who I always thought is, it's like the classic tailender, comes in and he's just swinging at everything and you can get him out anytime. And that's how he used to bat. But this series was so difficult to get Ambrose out. He's became like a pretty decent batsman all of a sudden.
Actually, if you see this test and you see the scorecards, Ambrose was, I think, 18 not out in the second innings and then got this 37 in the first innings, right? So his, I think Ambrose, even if you look at some of the series against Australia, I think when the situation demands it, he sort of buckles down, right? He's not a Srinath all the time.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, of course, the other famous Bridgetown test is a great testimony for that.
Yeah.
Also, the other thing that I noticed is that, we all know that Dravid and Sachin had a big partnership in the first innings. I was just checking if this was the first 100 partnership between the most prolific partnership pair in history. And it was. So it was a nice little discovery for me today.
I didn't realize that.
From my memory, it was very obvious that the wicket was not that bad at the time. Like if you look at the strike rate of Sachin in other matches compared to this, Sachin was scoring at a good clip, right? 62, 63. Sidhu also started off quite well. Dravid played slow, but that was more explained by Dravid's style of play rather than the wicket. So the wicket was playing out quite well in the first innings. There was of course the some help for the fast bowlers, but it was also consistent bounce. but it just dramatically deteriorated, from the third innings on. You could see that even when West Indies were batting, right, in the third innings. And by the time India started batting, one is the Sidhu dismissal that Sidhu spoke about. Even Lakshman, who was, who played for a while, could have got out like 4 times in that innings. He was all over the place, and it didn't help. In fact, funnily, Sachin was the only one of the few batsmen who was not really out because of the pitch. He just played a bit of a loose shot to Bishop, which is probably the most heartbreaking thing in the whole thing. I mean, maybe Sidhu, like he says, after the Sidhu dismissal, he was almost prepared for the loss. But for some reason, I was hoping we could still win it. So that Sachin dismissal came out as an absolute shocker for me.
I mean, the first innings too, right? I mean, of course, we all know the famous no ball that was not called. But leaving that aside, even the shot, I mean, it was just there for him to get a 4. And there was that one fielder there at point, and he just basically cut straight to him. And, of course, it was a no ball, and ideally he would have gone on to get 100. But even both the shots in the test were, quite heartbreaking from that point.
Well, and that situation was when it was 212 for 2, right? When he got out in the first innings. And, India collapsed for less than 100 after that. Actually, one of the things Mohan talks about in his report is the previous ball from Bishop to Sachin, the one before he got caught at point, was apparently swung in and then was a leg cutter that just went over the top of the off bail. So he talks about whether it was almost, ignoring the no ball, was almost, whether that that resulted in the wicket, that previous ball.
Could have. And talking about the no ball, I mean, the dismissal that I've also talked about, the Sidhu dismissal, I think was also a no ball, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a big no ball. In fact, I watched that at the highlights. And the other thing that I want to talk about related to that is also how even between like fairly eminent commentators like Holding and Tony Cozier and all that, you could sense that partisanship there because it was a fairly big no ball. And Tony Cozier on commentary says, "Oh, he just about overstepped there." Like in this day and age, no commentator in the world will say he just about overstepped there. I mean, that's a fairly big no ball.
Which one was that? The Bishop one or the Sidhu dismissal?
The Sidhu dismissal in the second.
Franklin Rose.
Yeah.
The other thing I read about was the big decision for India apparently was whether to play Robin Singh as the sort of third seamer or Dodda Ganesh for this pitch. And it was apparently Madan Lal who was coach then that twisted Sachin's arm into playing a sort of frontline third seamer.
But Dodda Ganesh was the third seamer of choice in South Africa itself, right?
No, here because Joshi played the previous test. I think whether to go with a 3-1 attack or sort of 2 plus Robin Singh plus Kumble.
Okay.
So the 12 before the match included the 11 that played plus Robin.
Well, I don't think it might have made that much of a difference either way. Yeah. I mean,
if you see the first innings, even though West Indies, they're 298, they batted for close to 100 overs. And Kumble bowled only 15 of those, right? And the question was, could he have been used a bit more from one end or from the time Ambrose and Chanderpaul were taking it away. Well, we're all Monday morning quarterbacks, but who knows?
Yeah, I think one of the things from that whole test though was like India could have done a lot differently, but I think the collapse was so abrupt and so stark that everything was blamed on that final innings batting. And how could you not chase 120? Isn't that like the most basic thing that a team can do, etc. I mean, and that often happens even now. It's like I'm sure years down the line, people will be talking about Ireland getting bowled out for one of the lowest scores. And well, yes, they did, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't have done things differently earlier. So it's like a whole game, but people's memories are, I guess, limited to the final part of it.
No, and also much smaller, right? But if you look at the West Indies second innings, I think they were 104 for 9 and got 140, right? With Dylan and Ambrose being not out again. 107 for 9.
Yeah, that little, but everything added up. But eventually, like for instance, if I don't know, maybe with today's coverage or maybe I'm biased because I'm a lot more mature as a person now. I don't think I would have the same expectations of being able to chase down 120 on that wicket in those conditions with the kind of resources that we had. So it was always going to be a steep chase. I find it so silly that I thought it's a match that we should have sealed. And the other part of this, the intensity with which we talk about or we feel about this particular loss, I also feel is because it is the only result of the series, right? I don't know if it would have mattered so much had we ended up with a 3-love result with 2 more results against us, or maybe 1 result in our favor and ended up in a 1-all draw or something. The fact that this was the only result, and had we won that, we could have pulled off this great series win in West Indies, is what makes it that much more intense.
And people were talking about it even then. Because I remember the commentators themselves saying how Antigua is renowned to be that a flat track and usually ends in draws, and it always rains in Guyana. So even during that third test, they were saying how this could be the decisive test of the series. But I think there's another aspect to it as well, to this heartbreak, is that until then, when India went abroad, they were always chasing the series, at least in my memory. I mean, I didn't watch the 86 series in England, so I can't, I didn't have that memory. But after that, whenever India, whether it's Australia, South Africa, West Indies itself, or England, India was invariably, they would lose the first test. And then they were always looking to chase the series, trying to draw, trying to get back parity. But this was the one series where they actually didn't lose the first test. They didn't lose the second test. They go into the third test. They have like a golden chance to win that third test, and they lose. So I think that whole build up over the 2 tests and, getting that hope that, okay, it's not as bad as earlier, it's getting better. And then you had, players slowly getting some form. And then you had this 1 session or 1.5 sessions where it's over.
No, I think if you look back on it, I think it's probably the 193 for 7 to add another 100. And 212 for 2 to getting all out within 100, right? I think I agree with Mahesh that clearly the 4th innings, probably if you had watched it less, of you guys had watched it less emotionally, I think you would have probably not rated India's chances. But I think those, if you were to pick 2 points of the match, which it was probably those, right? It gave West Indies another 100, and India collapsed for less than 100 for the last 8 wickets.
I mean, I don't know. Like I used to think that the 2 no balls that were not given would have made a substantial difference. But now, like as a proper adult thinking about it, I don't think it would have mattered because Sidhu could have got a very similar delivery, even if Franklin Rose had bowled it from within the crease. I mean, sometimes I don't want to rationalize all this. I want to hold on to this memory of a heartbreak and not try to rationalize it. In some ways, I feel guilty doing this.
In 2006, when I was in West Indies, I ended up going to Barbados, even though there was no match in Barbados. I ended up going there just to do some interviews and meet the people. And just personally, I just wanted to go to Barbados, because you go all the way to West Indies and don't go to Barbados. It feels pretty empty. And I ended up meeting Roland Holder and talking about this test. And, I brought up the no balls, and he reminded me that there were no balls that went against them too. And he specifically cited Courtney Brown. And I haven't checked this, or I haven't really verified this, but he said Courtney Brown was also out when it should have been a no ball. And he said there were other umpiring decisions too. And I thought of the same then. I'm like, I think shouldn't dig too deep into this test, because then I'll probably realize that India never had a chance at all.
Yeah, Sidhu, actually, Mohan's reports talks about exactly the opposite, where he said Lloyd Barker clearly mentioning this Sachin no ball of Bishop's no ball, during Sachin's wicket, but also talking about talking about how he called the Indian pacers for no balls, which weren't no balls. So I have no idea. I read it in his report, but it was quite funny that he says exactly the opposite of what Roland Holder told you.
Well, that's what I said. I mean, I don't know if Holder was misremembering or not, but I think it's fair to say it was bad umpiring throughout. Whether it was biased or not, I don't know. But there was that probably even added to the heartbreak, because not only are you getting these, especially with the Sidhu dismissal, not only are you getting this unplayable ball, you're also getting a bad decision. So it's like a double heartbreak, so to speak.
I mean, thankfully, I didn't listen to Tony Cozier saying that it's a marginal decision. That would have added to the intensity further.
No, and talking about bad umpiring, I noticed from the scorecard that the second umpire was Steve Randall, right? Who was awful in Australia in the 80s. So it probably could well be a case of just bad umpiring, incompetent umpiring, and not necessarily biased umpiring. Though,
do you remember a big build-up about a Sachin Lara contest within a contest before the series? I can't seem to recollect it. But now I think about it, I'm like, that should have been built as the big contest, right? Going into the series.
Yeah, I don't recollect it as well, which is very strange. But I do remember in the Barbados test, because Walsh wasn't there, Lara was the captain. And I do remember some talk being, about captain, be captain. When Sachin was batting, I remember Lara, there was a time when Lara was changing the field or things. And, the commentary was talking about how the two best batsmen, one of the best batsmen is trying to plot the dismissal of the other and things. But yeah, pre-series, I don't really recall too much of the hype. Maybe, as I say, there was hardly any time for hype, because they didn't have much of a break at all between the series and the other. So it's just like one thing after the other. And so maybe there wasn't a chance to really build it up.
Especially in the second innings, it was basically, Lara for the West Indies, and, all of India's hopes on getting to 180 was pretty much on Sachin, right? Or 120.
Lakshman with 4 lives could only muster 19. So you had to rely on Sachin.
Well, there was Dravid as well, who, was that technically you would think that he would have had the chops to at least handle the thing. But it wasn't just a difficult wicket. It was a impossible wicket. So, I mean, he ended up getting a really good ball too. I mean, unlike Sachin, who chased one, Dravid was quite beat. I mean,
he got a snort. Yeah.
He edged, and it was like, I think it was similar to, if my memory serves right, it was similar to what Rohit got in the semi-final. Such a good ball that you have no option but to play it, and then you edge.
But when Dravid gets out like that, it's a snorter. When Rohit gets out like that, it's laziness. Please get your... You cannot play the swinging ball. The other thing that I found particularly interesting in this is that the two most impressive batsmen for both the teams, which had Lara and Sachin, were actually Chanderpaul and Dravid. And at that time, who would have thought that they would go on to have such substantial test careers that they could pretty much be in the same ballpark as Sachin and Lara? I find it amazing that probably the other people that we would have talked about during the series or in the run-up to the series would have been Azharuddin or Hooper or one of those guys. And Chanderpaul.
Well, Hooper did have a good series.
But he didn't have like a particularly great career, for instance.
Yeah, you're right. No, I think more than Dravid, I think Chanderpaul was like the kind of rise that he had towards the second half of his career. I don't think anyone saw it coming. And I think that's also partly to do with his style. I mean, unfortunately, I think the projections of the future are often built on how technically sound a batsman is, and how, whether he can weather all conditions, whether he plays that textbook defense. And I think even like Sehwag and other players who were slightly off the beaten track, they suffered from that. That perception is that, hit and miss. And Chanderpaul was the other way. He was the anti-Sehwag. So he has done this like technique that came out of nowhere. And people felt that, maybe he'll grind out a few here and there. But when it comes to, short ball, when it comes to swinging conditions, it's going to be difficult. But yeah, he showed that it's possible. I mean, as is Steve Smith has shown over many years. I mean, you don't need to be textbook to be a great batsman, right?
And the other side of that is Hooper, right? When he came to India for the '87 World Cup first, he was called the second Gary Sobers because he used to bowl a bit of medium pace and off spin then, and was a great player to look at. At least optically, using the talk about stylishness, technique, etc. that you guys just spoke about. And relatively speaking, he I think massively underachieved, right? You look at his career numbers; they are sort of relatively average.
I mean,
Yeah.
given how much was expected of him, it was woefully short of expectations. The other thing about the Chanderpaul, Steven Smith kind of mode of batsman is that it's like, see, a Sehwag success gives a breakthrough for, let's say, a David Warner. Now, Jason Roy is already being talked of as the next, Sehwag or a Warner. It sort of opens the floodgates. But a Chanderpaul didn't prepare us for Steven Smith really till Steven Smith went on to have that success. It's not like you looked at Steven Smith and you thought this could be another Chanderpaul. We should not judge him too early. He literally had to score that, truckload of runs before he could get that status as one of the great batsmen in the world.
That's true. That's very true. And that's a very fine point because nobody, even Steven Smith, I mean, I don't think is preparing us for the next kind of off the beaten track batsman who's going to come. So, it's because these guys are so original. In fact, they're probably more original than the other extreme of batsmen. It's very hard to see them coming.
Some thoughts on Sachin's captaincy? Was it a big thing? I'm sure it must have hurt him as much, much more than it the fans. Had it not had somehow India won that match, do you think his captaincy path would have worked out very differently? Because he had a good start against Australia in the Border Gavaskar one-off test, then he won the series against South Africa at home. Of course, we lost the series against South Africa away, but we were never expected to win that. And if he could have pulled off this one win, do you think his captaincy career would have panned out very differently?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, he himself says that, he was shell-shocked at the end of this loss and at the end of the series. I mean, he actually writes in the book that he had thoughts of moving away from the game. That's how deeply, and he was 23, 24 then. And for a guy of that talent and genius to think of moving away from the only thing he probably knew so well tells you what an effect it had on him. And yeah, there was a lot of talk about Sachin's away captaincy. I mean, people were saying that he's a good captain at home and not a good captain away. I mean, whatever that means. Obviously.
He had 4 tests at home, and by this time, 6 tests away by the time of the 3rd test, so to say.
Yeah, but I'm saying, your captaincy can't change drastically between home and away. You're ultimately playing.
How about Sena captaincy?
Sena captaincy. Yeah, so I think, but overall, also he probably didn't get the squad he wanted, especially with the Srinath replacement, and maybe even in some other cases. Whether that might have changed things, who knows? And even in terms of while he was there, Azhar was the senior figure, right? And Azhar was batting at 6. And I remember there was a constant sort of criticism of why was he batting so low when Azhar could have probably batted higher. And, then they were saying, why not? They, of course, opened with Lakshman. And Dravid had done well in South Africa in the last test. He got his 100. But there was sort of constant questions as to whether Azhar was batting too low, and who knows what the dynamic there was. Also, Madan Lal was the coach, and he had his own say, as we discussed with picking of Ganesh ahead of Robin Singh and things. But one thing about Sachin, again, he writes in his book that the night before the final day of the Barbados test, he was at this famous place there called St. Lawrence Gap, where they have a big party during most of the tests. And he sort of was chatting with another local, and that local guy said that, hey, West Indies is going to bowl you guys out tomorrow. And Sachin actually said that, or took a bet with him, or he told him that there's no way West Indies is going to win and India is going to win, and they're having a banter. And he says that at no point did it cross my mind that we would lose that test. It's interesting. The St. Lawrence Gap actually is a sort of thing that people should explore, because it comes up in many test matches. There was one, Richie Richardson recently mentioned on a podcast how before the South Africa test in '92, when South Africa again got bowled out in the final innings in Barbados, apparently the night before that they had been at the St. Lawrence Gap, and all the South Africans were extremely confident of pulling the chase off, and how Richie Richardson was sort of bantering with some of them, saying, hey, we can bowl you guys out and all that. So it's an interesting little bit of maybe something to explore, the St. Lawrence Gap connection to away team collapses. Maybe something, maybe they spike your drink with something then.
So it's not that coincidental after all.
Sidhu, going back to your previous point on the Sachin's book, I think he also mentions about how he told his wife he's tried his best and things are not working, and alluding to your point of him being close to quitting, etc. But I really think, right, whether he was not given a team of his choice or some players of his choice, I think in a way the team was what it is. I actually think whatever the thing, I think he worked on his captaincy probably like he worked on his batting, where, a lot of practice and fine tuning this thing. And I think captaincy is probably, some of it is a bit more flair and, empathy with players and natural. Probably he was just not cut out for it. Whatever the case of that series and few of the points, they were all sort of second order conditions. And I don't think, it would have made a difference to him as a captain.
Well, I mean, if we didn't know it then, but in the future, there would be revelations about how that series too, especially a couple of the one-day games, ended up being dodgy. And they were, in the Tehelka tapes and things, they did come up. And even Pradeep Magazine, in his book, just Not Quite Cricket, he talks about that series and how he walked up to Madan Lal and, tried to question him about if anything dodgy was happening and things. So who knows the other factors that were playing a role as well.
Yeah.
On a lighter note, let's talk a little bit about this Karnataka domination of the Indian squad during that time. I mean, I was just checking. I remember Karnataka won like 3 Ranji trophies in like a span of 4 or 5 years. But this was after the first win. So there were 2 more wins to come after this. And there was already like Doda Ganesh, Sunil Joshi, Kumble. Kumble, of course, was already a big mainstay in the team. Dravid had just made his way through. Prasad was still there. Srinath just about left the squad because of injury. Is that the best phase of, purely from a representation at the Indian team level, was that the best phase of Karnataka cricket?
I think there was a phase in the 70s when you had Vishy, Brijesh Patel, Sudhakar Rao, and I think Prasanna, and
Sidhu, that was the two tours, right? New Zealand in 76, followed by West Indies in 76, where 4 or 5 Karnataka went, I think.
But yeah, this was definitely the second best, or along with that, the best phase. And I think Vishwanath was the chairman of selectors, right? So there was a lot of eyebrows raised because of that. Well, I think a few were questionable. I mean, you can even mention there were before that, and in the Titan Cup there was Sujit Somsundar who played, and then Vijay
Bharadwaj played around the same time, right?
Vijay Bharadwaj played around the same time. So yeah, you can definitely
David Johnson
ask questions. David Johnson, though Ganesh. I mean, I don't know about
Ganesh picked a 5-wicket haul in the tour match, right, for both Presidents 11 against Australia or something. I remember him getting Markwa LBW, and that kind of sealed his place in the Indian team.
Yeah, I think a lot of these players were probably, Ganesh was probably picked too early. I mean, there was a phase in Ganesh's career later on when he could have probably done more. And David Johnson, I think, was just a punt. They just thought, hey, here's a guy who's pretty quick at the domestic level. Why not try him out?
And he took Sachin's wicket in Challenger Trophy.
He took Sachin's wicket in Challenger Trophy, and then he got Slater's wicket in that test in Delhi, famously caught by Azhar. But yeah, a lot of these were probably just punts, and could have definitely. I'm not ruling out a bit of zonal preferences as well, but that's true. It was a time when Karnataka was there in the forefront of Indian cricket.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of zonal your zonal bias maybe, but I also think, given whether they didn't win it every year, they were pretty much at the top of Indian cricket for those few years. That it's almost a safer choice is to go back to that well, because I think probably in those days, I'm not sure how much the selectors watch regular round robin Ranji Trophy games as opposed to just the knockouts. So it's sort of also a bit of a lazy choice, right? Tamil Nadu won the Ranji Trophy in 87, 88. Suddenly you had a spurt of 5-6 people, and that 89 tour of West Indies, I think when Srikanth went and, hurt himself, there was Robin, there was Venkatramana, W.V. Raman was the replacement for Srikanth, and there was one more, if I remember right. But, that's also the case, right? And Venkatraman was manager as well as the physio was this guy Kannan. So, I think these phases come in Indian cricket, right, where certain teams and places dominate. But
well, there was
I think
World Cup game in this World Cup when every member of the team was from a different Ranji Trophy side. So that was something quite different, quite a contrast to back in the day when you had a dominance of one team or the other.
Excellent. I guess we've got quite a bit of ground. So why don't we just close it off with picking our 3 most heartbreaking cricket losses?
You're ending on a joyous note.
I've got you on board, so may as well go along with you.
Well, I have obvious choices. Krishna will probably go a little further back, but my obvious choices are Calcutta semi-final in 96, Barbados collapse in this test, and the Chennai defeat against Pakistan in 99. I think, 2003 final was bad, but nowhere close to this. And nowhere close to these 3. 96 I had high hopes for. 96, 97, 99, these were probably also the stage of my life when I was when it was easy to break my heart, and these things just broke it big time.
Yeah, I'll go with where I think India had a chance to win, but didn't, right? I think that the first 2 are the 2 tests of that 85-86 series. Where in Melbourne, I think India needed 90 odd to win on the 5th day, and it rained out. But I think previously the Border Gilbert last wicket stand had such horrendous umpiring that they nearly batted till lunch, and then the afternoon was rained off. But even then, when you look at the scorecard, Gavaskar and Srikanth were out, and India was 2 down. But India was going at 3 runs and over, 3 1/4 runs and over. So I don't know whether the rain was a surprise or not, but the batting certainly didn't look like that. The second one, I think, was the next test, right? Where again, 600 for 4, Australia followed on. And then, India couldn't bowl them out. And the third test, actually, I think my pick would be Sydney 2003, 2004. I think that was a chance to win the series. India made the 700 plus, and that was the Irfan Pathan Kumble match, right? Where Kumble got 8. Did India bat too much in the second innings, right? Where did we overplay that? But I think that test still rankles quite a bit in me, because that was the one chance, winning Adelaide, losing in Melbourne from that collapse on the second morning. Sydney should or could have been different.
Well, I have a couple of footnotes to add, but Mahesh, you should come with your selections first.
I think ours will be similar. So it's got to be 81 all out, and it's got to be Chennai 99. Those 2 are absolute certainties. Just because Sidhu's already picked 96 and 2003 is already mentioned, and also for another reason, I would pick the Bombay test against England, the KP Cook test. It was on a brown wicket. India was playing a revenge series after a 4-loud drubbing in England. The odds were heavily stacked in our favor, and I was there at the ground. It was quite, as thrilling as it was to watch KP, it was quite heartbreaking to see see that loss where our spinners were just not effective and their spinners were able to fully utilize the conditions. I would probably pick that just because I don't want to pick the same 3 yesterday.
Well, I have a couple of footnotes, both involving Zimbabwe. One was obviously that World Cup '99 game where they collapsed to Olonga and the rest. And then the other was the test match in Zimbabwe. Again, a glorious chance to win a test match and a test series outside Asia. This I'm talking about was 98, if I'm not mistaken. Where they basically...
Dravid scores 100, right?
Yeah, but then where they collapsed again to Olonga and to...
Sidhu, wasn't that Robin Singh's debut as well, right? I think he got a 0 or something, if I remember that test.
Very possible. I think he had got a 0 in his ODI debut in '89, and he probably got a 0 in his test debut as well.
So that brings us to the end of another episode of the 81 All Out podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever else you prefer. It would be wonderful if we could leave a rating and a review so that more people find us. You can also follow us on Twitter at 81 All Out and check out all our previous podcasts and articles on our website, 81allout.com. In case you're still listening, here's a shout out to our sister podcast on regional movies, whereistheotherbanana.com. You can follow them on Twitter at theotherbanana and watch out for updates on all the movie reviews and discussions that they put out. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts on the work we do, so please send us your feedback. Goodbye.
In the air, Srishan takes it! India win! He'll come back for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for 2.